All right, here we are again. Hello, 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 hello. Good to see everyone. Just going through the list in the waiting room. Apologies, my voice is kind of going to sleep for the day. Amy's going to be joining us a little bit later. She needed sustenance, and so did her fur babies, so she's doing that. So really excited to be doing the Plant People discussion group again this year. It kind of embodies what the entire Botanica Obscura conference is all about. So it's called the Plant People discussion group because we are all plant people. But it's also about people connecting to plants, connecting to people, connecting to plants in this sort of like cyclical transmission that happens when we all get together. We all sort of have this, to use Josh Williams' term, green thread that connects all of us in sort of this similar way. Working with plants, we all kind of speak a similar language, regardless of where we come from or what tradition we're practicing or what plants we work with. We can really find common ground and understanding um, through the language of plants. So it's really, really cool. Uh, Yes, everybody is welcome to have their cameras on, presenters, attendees, anybody that wants to be on camera can be on camera. Um, we'll also be like periodically muting and unmuting ourselves just to try and keep it organized and not like a complete chaotic mess. But really honored to be here with all of you. To be able to share this with all of you. Still getting some people in through the waiting room. But yeah, you're all so amazing, and I respect you all, and I admire you all, and the green part in me sees the green part in all of you, and I just get all soft and mushy about it. It is kind of a definitely an emotional process doing this conference. Going through like the excitement of getting all of the presenter submissions and seeing all of the really awesome topics to then like the existential dread of organizing the entire thing to then back to excitement of seeing everybody sign up and talk about it on social media and help with promoting the event, and then back to the existential dread of having to run the conference and sometimes wanting to break down into tears, other times wanting to go and like hide in the closet and just hope that somebody else does it for me. But every year, we do it and it kind of like reignites that little spark that makes me want to do it again next year. And that's because of all of you, and I consider you all friends and family and all that mushy stuff. So as we've gathered here today, I wanted to keep this as like pretty casual. So I've been sort of thinking just throughout the past couple of days of different conversation prompts or topics that we can discuss. And I do have like a few things that I can bring up that we can talk about in conversation. But if any of you have anything that you want to share, thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate that. But if any of you guys have anything that you would like to share as well, or anything that you think would be interesting to talk about as far as like group discussion, like I'm kind of unofficially moderating, but you all are welcome to jump in there too and kind of steer the conversation, however it seems to flow. But definitely want to open up for attendees. Anybody that has any questions. These could be questions directed towards a specific presenter, if something that they discussed in one of their presentations yesterday or today that you'd like to expand a little bit more on. If you have questions for the collective that you'd like to direct towards the entire group, feel free to do that. I think we're all pretty open and willing to talk about just about anything. Maggie. So try and kind of, if we can get like a rotation as far as our responses, or maybe just leave like a little bit of a gap or pause in between people speaking. So I don't know how crazy it'll get if we all start talking at the same time. Chat, hello, hello. So also want to make space and welcome the plant spirits, the mushroom spirits, the lichens, the everything in between in the natural world. Because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here doing this conference. Um, I think that a lot of people have sort of a specific plant spirit that they resonate with the most, or a plant spirit whose medicine that they maybe carry with them or project out into the world, a plant spirit that they have a special affinity with. So I guess maybe for the first question, if you could be a plant, what plant would you be and why? Or do you have a specific plant ally that you carry with you that sort of works as a partner or an intermediary for other spirits, or ones that are maybe present in a lot of the workings that you do, regardless of their magical correspondences? Um, maybe something that is more of a familiar spirit or a regular spiritual ally that you kind of connect with? Or is there a particular plant spirit that wants to step forward tonight and perhaps give some kind of a message or wisdom to the group? Let everybody marinate on that for a moment.
Do we just unmute and speak, or do we raise our hands? How do you want to do it?
I think we can just unmute and speak. I mean, unless it gets kind of crazy and we all unmute at the same time. Go for it.
I saw Ben lifting his hand as I spoke, so let Ben go first. Okay, all right. So if I were a plant, I would definitely be a snake plant. I think that, for those of you who came to the Botanica last year, I spoke about the snake plant, and in the tradition I'm a part of, I'm Brazilian born and raised. My root tradition is the Macumba, so it's the tradition of both of my families, the biological and the adoptive. And it's a very important plant to us, but to me, not only transports me to the safety of my godmother's house, Tawas de Terreiro, also like when I think about the plant, and then I'm gonna get all cheesy about it because it's like that's the plant for me. um when I think about the qualities of the plant and how she survives very much anything, like she can deal with no sun, she can deal with almost like desert, she can grow in Brazil, she can do so much. She propagates in water. Like, I don't know if you guys can see on the video, but on top on top of my door, there are two leaves of snake plant that they're just hanging there. That's also where my Ogun lives, basically. And there's no water, there's no nothing, and they are just gonna keep on going. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just the nature of that plant. So anytime I'm doing anything, I'm gonna have a plant around. I'm going to carry with me for work. Every now and then, I put underneath my bed. It's just like it's my emergency go-to, talk to kind of plant. That's my plant, I would say.
Thank you.
Okay. So that was beautiful, Deborah. Thanks for sharing that. I've been thinking, like, I was quite nervous speaking at this conference because I never really saw myself as a plant person. I saw myself as a folklore person that was kind of interloping into this space. And over the past 2 days, I've really realized how much I am a plant person. I might not be able to have the green thumb, but I do realize how much and how intimate some of my connections with plants and certain fungal spirits that shall not be named today has been. But I was thinking about because this is the first time I've taught in any kind of witchcraft magical space in at least 6 months. Most of my work is in therapy practice, and I've been heavily working on my own projects. So I've been really small, very focused, very down, very like focused on the little details, citations. All of the authors sitting with us today know what that like hell that is, right? But I was thinking about like my love of moss, and moss came up in one of the segments. And don't dare ask me which one because it's all a blur already. I don't even know. It was somebody talking about moss. But I absolutely love moss, and I always have. And it's one of the first plants that I really remember taking a look at, because in the part of Wales that I'm from, it was filled with lichens and moss. It was quite a rocky environment, very green environment, and I remember going into the garden and just like really paying attention to moss, and I've just loved it ever since. Um, but I was thinking about how, in really paying attention to the small spaces, to the micro spaces, how moss is a king in that space, is a queen in that space, and it's everywhere. Every single space has moss. It's very difficult to find a place on Earth that doesn't have moss in it somewhere. Um, and I really connected. I think I really connected my therapy practice with that kind of witchcraft and magical folk practice piece because it really does take really paying attention to the details, um, even if it's getting into the dirt, even if it's like looking through microscope, whatever it is, right? Um, and I've realized from my own practice that's something I really need to get back to is those finer details, get back to the basics, get back to the small, because I've noticed started to become an armchair magician again because of the amount of heavy, library work that I've been doing. So that has been quite a powerful thing. Um, and yes, Kobe, I'm going to say that this was the event that caused me to think that. So it's
I'm curious to know how many of us consider ourselves to have green thumbs. Raise your hand.
I'll talk about a plant next. Should I take a turn? Um, I work a lot with really a lot of exotic plants, but I find myself coming back to rosemary so much. I love rosemary, and it's one of the ones that we teach with when we teach people spagyric work. because it's incredibly generous with its body and its spirit and its soul as we work with in our practice. So it has a lot of minerals in it that we can extract when we purify that ash to make those salts. It has a lot of essential oil. It tinctures very well. And one of my favorite stories of rosemary is working in a festival booth. I was working with someone who was working on a lot of chronic illness, especially around depression, and just the way that can kind of snowball into physical things that reinforce it. And she had been to so many people for help with this. She had been to the Amazon and hiked all over, and truth be told, I say this compassionately, but she was kind of into it at that point. She was really into looking for help for her problem. So seeing this person, seeing that person, being very into how far she had to travel and how much money she had to spend and all of this. And I gave her a little taste of something. And I said, you go sit, meditate, hang out somewhere for a little bit and come back and tell me how you feel. And she came back an hour later and she's like, that's the first time in like 5 years that I have not been depressed. What did you give me? I know it's probably going to be really expensive and really rare, but I must have some. And I said, that was rosemary. And she was like, but that's growing outside my front door. And I'm like, yeah. And she was just amazed by that. And it was just such an illustration of how, this ordinary plant that she walked by every morning and thought nothing of was just waiting there to help her. And, she learned a lot. She had a lot of great visits with a lot of really interesting people because of this, but it was there when she got home, and it was there, and I just had to remind her of it. And I've seen just the power of that plant in that way. And then, like I said, in our lab work too, it's just such a generous plant to work with and extract. And we feel like it's the plant that teaches alchemical and spagyric work better than any of the others we work with.
I'll take a turn. So, hi. So, I don't know. As an herbalist, I think that it's really hard to parse apart my favorite plants. Like, which one am I feeling right now? I don't know. Um, and like my everyday job is as an herbalist, so like I'm working with them all the time. Um, but I think there are two that are really pulling on my brain, and that's tobacco and osha. Like I work with tobacco all the time. My original mentor was a curandera, and her husband was a tabaquero from Peru. And so tobacco is a really big part of everything we did. And I learned a lot about it. It's a really powerful plant in my practice. Um, and we use it for protection and cleansing and guiding. And it's a very powerful teaching plant. But then Osha, like there's a very particular one in our region that grows on top of a mountain in the middle of a field. And if you know anything about Osha, like it usually grows in the shade on slopes. It doesn't grow in fields. But this one has been growing in like direct sunlight in the middle of a field for decades and decades. And all of my teachers go to that plant and offer it water and offerings. And we call it Grandmother Osha. And so I've actually been using that plant very recently as a type of master root. So like in Conjure, master root is more of an Angelica species, but Osha is very closely related to Angelica. And I've been using it that way, and it's been teaching me a lot of really cool stuff. So I don't know. I'm going to say strong tobacco with an Osha chaser is my favorite.
I started off with a hard one.
I can jump in, Kobe. I'll take this from the angle of what plant would I want to be, and I would was also one of my favorites. I would say Laminaria digitata seaweed, so also called oarweed. I have her like tattooed on my arm right here. Anyone who is in my workshop on herbs for the dark night of the soul will know that that plant helped trigger a dark night of the soul for me. I was apprenticing to a seaweed farmer up in northern Maine, and I was dragging literally throughout the week thousands of pounds of fresh oarweed from the boat to the drying rooms, hanging it up, and was just slathered in the delicious iodine-rich goop, and it like healed my body in these ridiculous ways and made me be able to cry for the first time in like a year and a half. And I cried every day for 3 weeks. And it was so like restorative and also earth shattering and wild from such an underrated plant. Like this seaweed, something that I used to like walk in at the beach and just like shriek at. I'd be like, oh, touching me now is just this beautiful healer and teacher for me. And she's so big and powerful too. Like she's so rooted and anchored to the rocks, but is able to flow and move and groove and grow and thrive in the, I mean, ridiculously icy cold waves of northern Maine. Not just there, but in many, that of many beautiful places. So I would be just a giant, huge frond of oarweed. She's amazing.
I think that I can go next. Hi, I'm Emily, for anyone that doesn't know me. Um, and this is similar answer. Like, I feel like I would be this plant, but I also feel like it's like, God, I wish I was this plant. And it's got to be wolfsbane. Um, Hi Camden. I just love wolfsbane so, so much. And it's one of my biggest plant teachers, and it's one of the only plants that I can actually grow. I do not have a green thumb. My sister Brenna, who just spoke, inherited the green thumb in our family. I'm good with animals, though.
I
That's
did
mine.
not. I do not have a green thumb, baby.
Yeah,
I
you
I
do.
have this much more than you do. Our mom kept those genes.
But wolfsbane, because it has such a dichotomy to it. She's so I mean, she's frightening because she's the queen of all poisons. She's intense, she's necromantic, she's this shapeshifter. She could very easily kill you if she wanted to. But I have so many fond memories of the cheekiness of Wolfsbane, at least when I've worked with her. I find that that spirit, it has a very trickster nature that can be really fun and really exciting, and it can keep me on my toes. And I love that sort of like fun, bubbly, like jokey, and then simultaneously so dark and intense. She has this kind of dual nature that as like a queer non-binary person, I can really connect with, and it just makes me so happy to be in her presence. And I like to think that I do embody that, but that's also still something that I strive for, I think.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that and having a plant spirit that you identify with, but also kind of like aspire to be more like. I always sort of lead with, deadly nightshade's my main plant spirit ally. And, I definitely believe that. And it's one that out of the nightshade family, the one that I'm the most comfortable with working with and have the most experience working with. Um, However, I think I'm probably more like a dandelion, or if we talk like poisonous plants, maybe even a foxglove, which initially wasn't one of the baneful herbs that I was really interested in, because it didn't have like those very dark and sinister and vicious associations, even though it is, just as poisonous as a lot of the other ones. It always seemed more ethereal and more associated with the fairy realm and sort of this gentle side of the poison plant spectrum. But I'd say that I aspire to be like Deadly Nightshade, but she's like, girl, you wish you could be. And then really in reality, I'm more like the Foxglove. Foxglove being all about heart healing, and it is glamorous. So I can relate to that. But more along the lines of like the heart healing, the empathy, the just the emotional side of it. I think I try and present like Deadly Nightshade, but definitely more of a foxglove when you get down to it.
Hello. Am I Oh, so I'm Melanie. I was just thinking of foxglove when I was like, I don't really know enough about all of these plants. Um, I'm still learning. I feel like I've been learning for a long time, but uh, the foxglove, what I was thinking about, and I was just thinking about before you jumped in with foxglove, was they're like playful in a way to me because they just pop up wherever they want. They move all over the yard. I never know when they're going to pop up, and because their cycle also is like every other year, right? That they grow. I don't know which one's going to pop up when. Um, and so, and of course, I connect them with the fairies, and I just think that they're beautiful. And so I thought it was kind of funny that I was thinking about it, and then you popped up and commented. So, and I think of them kind of as playful, the way they pop around the yard and stuff. So, there, I don't know if it's a favorite. I have so many plants I love. So, but that's the one that came to mind.
Thank you. Yeah, it is almost impossible to pick a favorite. I think it's more of which one kind of muscles its way to the forefront of your mind the most.
Yeah, I'd like to add that for me, the first one that came to mind, of course, was cannabis. I just love a good weed. What I mean by that is that they are resilient and hard and industrious, and you can put them anywhere and they'll still thrive. You obviously have to give it some love and tenderness and guidance. But yeah, I'm fascinated working with cannabis and cacao. So cacao for me is like definitely what you were talking about, Kobe, when it comes to the heart and really like working with the heart and really activating all like circulation and also the antioxidants. So when I think about plants, I definitely consider myself a green thumb. I rescue plants. That's kind of my love language. So whenever I see a plant that's struggling, I will save it. I will hijack it. I will, do a little rescue situation. But my all-time favorite is cannabis. It's been one of my mediators, one of my healers, my girlfriend, you name it. And I think why I love her so much is because I think my first time when I first experienced cannabis, I really enjoyed the experience. It was very psychedelic for me. Some people do recount experiences where they have their first time on cannabis and they have a psychedelic trip. And for me, it felt like coming home. It felt like the spirit of cannabis was welcoming me back. Maybe I've worked with cannabis for many, many, many lifetimes. And when I experienced it for the first time again, it was like, like I could feel a wave of calm and serenity that I hadn't felt before. And then when I've married it with cacao, wow, the profoundness of, I think, even like the directive kind of like effort towards healing the heart and working on some wounds and processing some things while using cannabis has been very, very healing for me. So yeah, something about combining those two. And also, yeah, it's just really hard to think about just one plant. I really loved the moss and the seaweed because moss and seaweed are they related? They're like extremely similar. They have a lot of similarities and they're everywhere. They like cover everything, right? So seaweed obviously in the water and moss obviously on the earth. But yeah, from a botanist perspective, yeah, both are some of my favorite too. So it's hard to pinpoint, but yeah, those are some of my faves.
Well, I can't believe no one mentioned Datura yet. So, of course, those of you who know me well enough, Datura would be the plant that I love the most and probably the one that I would like to be. I think Maggie would agree with me. Um, I don't know why. It's the first plant that kind of took me into the poison path. So I always call my very first datura White Rabbit, and all her children is my white rabbits, because that's the one that took me into that rabbit hole. And I go to Utah for hiking like almost every year. And my husband was just mentioning how like happy I seemed when I was in Utah hiking. And I was just thinking like, why? I think one of the reasons why is, especially in southern Utah, in the desert area, like one of those canyons when you hike, they are literally covered in datura. Like Josh, you might know, can nap and like go to like the Coyote Butte to hike, and all the canyons and all the little like dried river bands is all like covered in datura. And I would literally just like run to it and just hang out, sit there, and everybody look at me like, what the hell is wrong with her? And I'm like, no, I'm just here with my friends. And I say hi to all of the plants, and it just made me feel so happy. So yeah, so datura is probably my favorite. And some of you probably heard my story, how I even first met datura is like, I was driving down the highway and I heard about datura, and in the corner of my eye, I saw datura as I was driving down the highway. I told my husband to stop the car, and I jumped out the car, run across the highway, and basically go look at the plant that was on the side of the highway and be like, oh my God, it's a datura. And then the rest was history. So
All right, well, datura came up, and I don't know if people can see my arm, but she's here along with my vulture. So I'll chime in real quick. Datura was one of the first poison plants that I ever cultivated, and I started with the Jimson weed variety, and we have since blossomed into Datura anoxia. We grew them here last summer and had nights of like 12 of them all blooming at the same time, and it was intoxicating. And I wanted to say that if anyone would like seeds, we have hundreds of Datura anoxia seeds, and I would be happy to send you some. So I will put my email in the chat, and if anybody would like Datura anoxia seeds, shoot me an email and I'll send you some.
They're gorgeous. They're the white blossoms with the tinge of purple around the outside. And this, of course, if you're not familiar with the scent, it's one of the most intoxicating floral smells I've ever encountered.
And they're enormous. Like the flowers are huge.
My first experience with datura was one that was unbeknownst to me at the time. I was, for those of you that came to our talk, I did a pretty extensive apprenticeship in the Amazon with Shipibo and other indigenous groups. And on my journey, I worked with an elder in Cusco, and he was quite surprised that my friend and I were not the average tourists that he was used to hosting ceremony with. And we were unfamiliar with him. And so there was a feeling out process. And about halfway through the ceremony, he said, oh, you guys really aren't tourists. And I was like, no, man, we're pilgrims. We've been in the Amazon for months on end and doing diets. And he said, so I have another brew for you guys. And we said, okay, great. So he took the top shelf vine mixture down. And so we had a sampling of that. And I don't know, 40 minutes later, my head is in the ground and I am deep in cavernous underworld type experience. And I picked my hat up and I said, Kush, what else is in this besides ayahuasca and chacruna? And he said, oh, nothing. And inside me, I'm like,
somebody else is here.
I've been working with this for many, many years, and this does not take me down the way this is taking me down. And about 30 seconds later, he goes, oh, and datura too. And I went, okay. And I put my head back down, and I had one of the more momentous evenings of my life. And it was quite by surprise. And I haven't chosen to work intimately with it like that again, but I do love cultivating it and just having it either in the house or on our deck. And when it's blooming, bring it into the bedroom and dream with it. And it is a profound, profound plant.
Yep. So send me those emails. Getting the seeds going, you need to be a little bit patient, but once they're going, they grow very, very quickly. Great question, Kobe. Thank you.
And datura seeds can be very sporadic. I try so many times thinking that like, oh, the seeds are not growing, so I recycle the dirt, and then of course it's just gonna pop up, be like, yeah, hey, and then I'm like random daturas. I don't even know like what species they have, because I have inoxia, I have wrightia, I have like a bunch of different stuff. So, but yes, thank you for sharing the seeds.
I've noticed with datura, typically is referred to as being like one of the easier nightshades to germinate and get started. But like you said, it is super sporadic. And what'll happen for me is I'll have them planted in little pots and they won't grow, they won't grow. Weeks will go by. I'll keep watering the soil. Nothing's happening, nothing's happening. And then like as soon as I'm like, all right, next, and then go in and dig up the soil and plant something else in there, couple days later, I'll have little datura babies popping up from the seeds that I put in before.
One plant that I would love to bring forth for us to talk about is thyme, that Josh talked about in his presentation, and I was able to watch it live this afternoon. And when you put that thyme slide, my partner was cooking, William was cooking, and I was just like, William, Josh is talking about thyme, because like I don't feel that we do that enough. And that genuinely like brought me so much joy. Thyme saved my life once. I would love to share like a very short version of that story, but not medical advice, just sharing a personal story. When William and I got COVID in 2021, I guess, it's just both of us. We live quite isolated from family, and we got really, really bad. And I was having like a feverish dream. We were really worried, no health insurance. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? You guys can imagine all of that. And a great ancestor of the family, the Pombagira Gypsy of the Road, she woke me up. And I sound very crazy, but I think I'm in the right place to share this story. She woke me up, and I remember seeing her and just saying, like, am I dying? Am I having like a feverish dream? Like, am I hallucinating? Why am I seeing you so vividly right now? Like, something is wrong. And she was like, well, I need you to wake up. I need you to get up and make thyme with honey for you and for William. And I was just like, thyme? And she was like, yeah, thyme. And I go to the kitchen and I'm like dripping sweat and I'm shaky and I can feel like I'm really waking up. And William is getting really bad too. I got like a day before him. So, we were both like miserable. And I kid you not, like I get a pan that we use for soup and I make like two of those of like thyme and honey and a little bit of garlic. And we drank that like it was our full meal for the day. We drank so much of that. And I kid you not, she would wake me up. She woke me up a couple times to drink another cup of that tea. And then the next day we were recovering. Like the peak of the thing was gone. Like I'm not gonna say that we were 100% because we were not, but no more fever, no more heavy breathing. And I really feel that thyme, of course, that the gypsy, if it wasn't for her, I didn't know. I didn't know that thyme had anything to do with mucus or respiratory system. That's the thing that blows my mind. She was like, I need you to drink this. And I was just like, yeah, sure. Cause I kind of don't want to die right now. I have some dreams and plans. And then after, when I recovered, I did my research and I was just like, oh my gosh, thyme. And he was here this whole time. So I just love it, Josh. When you brought that slide, you made my day. I was so happy to be there in person. Just
I have a personal mission to talk about thyme more than anybody wants to hear, because that's one of those plants that gets relegated to the spice cabinet and marked off as we tend to like kind of shit on the Lamiaceae allies, but thyme is no joke. Thyme is no joke.
I was doing a presentation for our Patreon a while back, and I was joking that it's all Lamiaceae all the time, because I was talking about the 3 different levels that we work with, and they ended up being the poster family for soul, for like the soul of plants, because of that essential oil and the way that they work, and just the way that they communicate so much about the higher aspects of medicine, but fully grounded in physical effects too. And I couldn't pick one, so I was just like, it's all of them today. We're going to talk about, thyme and oregano and rosemary and lavender and all of those. So yeah, there's no such thing as too much talking about them.
I wanted to share that I was actually thinking of thyme today. I work at an apothecary, and someone had come in looking for something to help clear out the really horrible congestion. And I thought, oh, thyme would be amazing for this, but we didn't have any because it is kind of just written off as like a spice to use in the kitchen. But it is such a powerful medicinal plant as well. Um, and with that, I wanted to share what my plant ideas were. It was so hard to choose between them all because there were so many powerful plants that I've worked with. But I think the way I imagine it, at least, is rose is kind of what I aspire to be like. That's kind of the dream ideal self. But deep down inside, I'm actually Datora. And there's just this constant transformation that I find in my life and the adventure of what that feels like. Um, but the plant who really introduced me to working with plants in this deeper and more spiritual way was mugwort. Um, so she's kind of like the foundation for me, like that kind of grandmother energy. Uh, it was actually during COVID as well. um, I had come across mugwort. I knew of mugwort, but I had never worked with the plant in person. And it was really that personal experience with the plant. I was able to sit there with her, talk to her, cry with her, sing to her, and ask permission to use her leaves. And I brewed myself a tea and astral projected for 3 days straight. And that was super intense. Um, I had dreams with Hecate, and there was so much transportation. There was all this moving, and it was just a really helpful energy, especially amidst all the stagnation that COVID kind of created. It just felt like everything was put on pause. And this kind of, I don't know, kind of get the circulation going, if you will. Um, but Datora has definitely been the one who feels like home and that feels safe and that feels familiar, and I can kind of grasp it more. It's a lot more personal, and mirror-like. uh, she's just amazing for so many things. There's the perfect balance between that light work and that dark work, and the Libra in me just really thrives in that kind of environment. So I get to kind of have the best of both worlds and experience all parts of the spectrum and get every single perspective I can on something before I decide and take action. And I just really appreciate that about Datora's presence, and her sweet, sweet smell. She was just always lingering in the background of my life, and I just never knew what it was. I just knew the sweet smell until I finally put a name to the face, like 3 years later, 4 years later, after I first interacted with the plant. Yeah, those are definitely my plants.
I'd like to chime in. Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. Good evening for those on the East and West Coast and everybody above. One, two two babies came up for me. The first one is Rue. I grew up with Rue. I I mean, I grew up in the tradition of Lukumi and Espiritismo. So Rue really, I mean, Rue is kind of like the hot chick. When you see her and you smell her, you kind of pause and be like, and rub her between your hands. And it's one of these amazing medicinal plants. They're so good for pains and aches and salves, and really good for clearing and calling in the ancestors. And I've done some really incredible work when it comes to just calling in the really deep spiritual ancestor work. And another one, I'm not sure if it's really common in the United States, but it is in yeah, Maferafuno Risha every day. That's right. I don't know if it's so common here, but it's called yerba bruja, or the life plant. And one of the really cool things about this plant is she's kind of like going back to moss. Um, she's everywhere, absolutely everywhere, and entirely resilient. I mean, as a kid, what I used to do back in Puerto Rico, we put a, it's kind of terrible now I say it. We put a rock on top of her, and from around the where you put it, she'll grow little babies, and that would be her little coven of children around her. And it just kind of shows the resilience of this plant. And again, we use Yerba Bruja to like a lot of cleansing rituals and baños and clearing. So there's the resiliency of this beautiful plant and ally that comes in, as well as the intoxicating scent and aroma that brings you back into the ancestor work. And those are my two hot chick plants, so to speak.
I love that. Thank you for sharing.
And we are really, really anxious as children in my family. I don't know if other people in Brazil do that, so I cannot say like in Brazil we do it, but in my family, if you're really, really anxious as a child, they would give you root tea with sugar. Yeah.
To kind of piggyback off of the plant spirit theme, does anyone have any patron spirits? These could be deities, ancestors, not necessarily just relatives, but herbal ancestors in general, or spirits that aren't necessarily plants that kind of act in a tutelary capacity, that help you in your work with the green world.
And I would say Datura would be kind of it's the ancestor that I didn't even know that I had. So those of you who've been to my Botanica Obscura presentation a couple years back, and I basically did this talk about the poisonous plants of Hong Kong, and I picked out the four, which is named the most poisonous plants, and Datura was actually one of them that I never even knew until I started looking into like, okay, what are the poisonous plants in Hong Kong? That's where I'm from, Hong Kong. So there's basically that's where like I feel like I have this kind of ancestral connection with it that I didn't even know until I'm like 3,000, 4,000 miles away.
If it's like a plant that helps me in my relationship with other plants as well as other spiritual beings, then for me it would be the blackberry. I feel that like it's the one that I have tattooed, to the point that like I have a representation of her on my body. Um, but because for me, the dealing with the divinized ancestors of my family's practice and the plants is very like entangled. I have to say that I got to the blackberry because it is one of the plants of the Pombagira gypsy of the road. Like when I say it like that, I'm not taking away from the plant or from the Pombagira. It's just that the way that we interpret is that they work in sacred synchronicity, right? So like a spirit will have plants that help us understand the spirit's wisdom and message, and the plant will work with spirits that do the same. So in that case, I have to say the blackberry for many reasons, but like everything's medicinal, it bears fruit, the ability of, kind of growing around those big trees, and yes, sucking the life of it sometimes if you're not careful with it. She's quiet, she represents a lot of, and I think it's a she, by the way, the blackberry spirit. um she represents a lot of the things that I feel is spiritually are the things that the ancestors advise me to invest on, if that makes sense. Like the nature of the plant carries a lot of the things that I am trying to cultivate as a human. So to me, it would be the blackberry.
I would say my work with the Norse goddess Freya has been the most impactful for my herb work. I mean, yes, working with my well ancestors, but my work with Freya has been so connected to my own healing journey with the herbs and healing my libido and sexuality and sensuality in a way that was completely mind blowing and life altering in the most beautiful way. Um, Not necessarily her instructing me to work with particular herbs, but her inspiring me to work with my own body and work with the female body, with the herbs, like healing my menstrual cycle and learning pelvic steaming practices, and learning how to anoint myself with herbal oils and learning about the lusciousness of herbalism from her, and working with the herbs to enhance that, you could say, divine femininity, but that luscious feminine power. And it doesn't even have to be feminine, but for me it is, but to enhance my lusciousness and my joy and sensuality. So she's been an incredible teacher for many things for me, but especially herbalism as a path for healing sexuality and sensuality. And I could talk about that for hours, so I'll pause myself here.
I can talk to one or, a couple. So Hecate is like my main jam. Like she's the goddess that I work with the most, and she's taught me a lot. Um, but there is a particular spirit who came to me when I was first learning herbalism. And I don't know if she's an ancestor or if she's an aspect of myself, or like, I don't know. Is she just some green spirit that takes on the guise of a human being? I have no idea. But I call her Grandma Maggie. And like every time I need to, like every time I have a question or I'm like, is this crazy? Should I do this? I'll go to Grandma Maggie, and Grandma Maggie will like, it's almost like a spirit flight kind of thing, um, where like I appear like in her little cottage, like, we just hang out for a second, and she usually lays out a few things on the table and mixes them up, and she's like, get it? And I'm like, no, thank you. And then after a while, like it takes a little bit to process and integrate. And then I'm like, oh, that's what she was talking about. So she has taught me to do a lot of really interesting things. Um, yeah. And I don't know, she just happened, she just came along. She's cool. And then the other spirit that I work with really intimately is just the spirit of the mountain that I work with. Um, and that one I call the Green Devil, or the Wild God. And it's just like the wild spirit of the Sandia Mountains, who has guided me to a bunch of really cool places. Like in another spirit flight capacity, just kind of sending myself up through the trees and then just seeing where he's going to take me. Like, where are you going to take me today, Green Daddy? And then the Green Daddy takes you to really cool little like grottos, or you find a really cool dead deer. Like, it's always very interesting, areas where energy is flowing in in a way that you need exactly at that time, or leads you to exactly what you were looking for, or because I'm a teacher leading me to like these new teaching gardens that I had never been introduced to. Uh, but now I have them to teach my students in, and that's really cool. So those are some of the ones.
I could share a little bit. I would name Madrecita Ayahuasca as a profound teacher and ally that has really deepened and opened my relationship with a lot of other plants. Lots of stories. I won't go into them, but I've gotten to the point where when I go to ceremony, I sometimes intentionally will like take a sprig of rosemary with me to commune with in ceremony, to come to know that plant through the openness that the medicine creates. Last ceremony I went to, they were burning a bunch of Palo Santo at one point, and my relationship with that tree, with that bark, is completely changed from that experience. And I think the porosity of my being and the sensitivity and the surrender to the cleansing of the smoke, just I thought I knew Palo Santo. Now I have magnitudes more profound relationship with that. So I had a night at ceremony that was completely about datura. All I could smell all night was the sweetness of datura, and there was no datura in the room. There was no datura in the brew, but it was just overwhelming. And for a few days after ceremony, I kept getting little vanilla fragrance on the breathes, and it was incredible. So for me, that brew is really a conduit for opening and deepening my existing relationships with so many plants. Want to add anything?
I would echo the tobacco that was mentioned earlier, and my relationship with tobacco profoundly changed while I was in South America and getting to know the Mapacho, the Nicotiana rustica. The I didn't know it was possible to work with plants the way we were taught to work with the Mapacho plant, from drinking and ingesting it to just the depth of dreaming that we were able to do and the depth of purification that we were able to accomplish with tobacco. It changed my relationship with the potential of plants in the decades since then.
Micah just said they got mapacho seeds. We have mapacho seeds. We haven't tried to germinate them yet. Maybe this summer. But yeah, tobacco is a big one too for ceremonial purposes and offerings. Great question, Kobe.
I have a oh,
Well,
sorry,
go
Kobe.
ahead. Go ahead. I'm just filling in the space.
Yeah, so I have a spirit who I've been building relationship with from the Norse tradition. And there's very little known about her textually, so all this information is UPG. This is just from me interacting with her over the past year or so. But her name is Yarn Saxa, and she's a giantess. She's one of the giantesses. She was the mother of Thor's sons, or at least one of them. But I don't really work with her in that context. I work with her as kind of a dark earth mother who, in my experience, has a lot of connections with plants like the hawthorn and the blackthorn and, traditional fairy trees, and also with foxgloves and poison plants. When I go and I visit this sort of spirit realm that I operate in with the spirits who I work with, who are mainly the giants of the Norse tradition, there's this beautiful poison garden that she tends to. And so I can go there and I can communicate with her. And she's shared recipes for incenses and all kinds of different blends and brews. And that really, she's who immediately came to mind, just a really beloved spirit in my practice.
I don't know if you're responding to Ben's comment in the chat, That's really interesting. I'd be curious to know that too, if Yarn Saxa was the vulva that Odin visits in Voluspa.
Yeah, so I haven't heard the Yarnsaksa theory. I've heard it theorized as Angrboda, who is actually the giantess who I'm devoted to mainly. So it's, of course, she would come up. Um, but it's theorized to be her. Some theorize Freya. There's no confirmation on who it was. I almost think it doesn't necessarily matter because it could have been any of these great goddesses who were consulted for wisdom by the gods, including Odin.
This is what we have sibling debates about, is about Old Norse deities and the lore and the Voluspa.
If I may add, because like I really like when we talk about the deities and the other spirits who have aided our relationship with the plants, but I always feel a little incomplete if I don't mention the people who I met while alive, such as my biological mother, my adoptive mother, my godmother, my grandfather, my grandmother too, in her own way. Because even though like they are not deities per se, and my mom's still alive, so I'm happy for that. She's not on the ancestral shrine yet, but I really feel that like she is my bridge in my relationship with the plants, as well as the spirituality in general. Even my biological mother, her own way, even though we were all born in the same tradition, right? But my biological mother and I, we don't have a relationship in the moment, but I can definitely look back and acknowledge that she did pass down to me the love for the plants and the love for spirituality her own way. So I always like to acknowledge them too, because when my mother comes to visit, she still lives in Brazil. Like the plants come alive in a way that I cannot do that on my own. Like she has the green thumb and everything. So I always like to pay homage to them because I feel that they are it for me. They are the bridge not only with the plants, but as well as with the ancestors and spirituality is in all the deities and everything. They were the vessels, or like we say in my family, the horses. They carried all the knowledge for me.
I would like to add to that, Deborah. I really love that you brought that up because when he asked, what are some guides or, my first one that came to mind was my biological grandmother. She taught me how to speak to the plants, how to listen to them, the subtle nuances, the little messages that they give us if they're happy, if they're unhappy. If you move them somewhere and suddenly they're like, ooh, I didn't like that, move me back, and so it's like, that's so awesome that you shared that was like your lineage, right? Your connection, which I have. And it was very spiritual. It was like as someone who is a recovered Catholic, connecting with nature was literally the most nourishing experiences because it felt very welcoming, very natural. Whereas Christianity, unfortunately for me, was very regimented and institutionalizing. Whereas when I communed with plants, it was, yeah, they listen to us and they observe us, and we observe them. So now we're learning so much about that. And for me, it started with my grandmother. My mom has always had a love of plants and herbalism. But yeah, it was kind of like inadvertently something that was always there for me. So I was really grateful for it. But yeah, I value that. I value that connection through just like, yeah, just lineage and our ancestry. And for me, the Amazon, my love of the Amazon and connecting with plant allies from the Amazon, it's always been something that I'm very drawn to.
And it's not to say that they were perfect humans, right? Or they were perfect in those relationships. Like my grandmother, for instance, Lucia, the biological one, really loved her. She didn't like kids. So we started having a relationship when I became a teenager. And then, unfortunately, because of what happened between my biological mother and I, we kind of lost, contact for the last years of her earthly existence. but she was a drunk and she used a lot of magic to do what we would consider harm, whatever, that's a whole different conversation. But when she sung to that rue plant, when she sung to the snake plants, they came, they grew, like the way that she would make coffee calm you down. That we know the science behind it. Like coffee is not supposed to make you feel all nice and cozy, but she sung to those things and they did. So for me, by watching this woman, it really helped me understand the duality of spirituality and life and our human choices, and that nothing is 100% good. The whole thing Takobi talks about the poisonous plants, right? When you talk about the poisonous plants, sometimes I hear you talk about the woman in my family, to be fair, because it's like what the dosage makes the medicine, right? There this duality of these humans who I have so many good things to say about them, but I also have some things to say that I'm like, ooh, but they sung and the plants grew. What can I say?
I actually want to jump in, and I should start singing to my plants because some of them are dying and maybe they just want me to sing to them. So thank you for that. But you touched on something and I was thinking and I was thinking and I was like, I don't want to make this too funny, but I'm gonna make it a little funny. One of the ancestors plants that I use, and I feel like it wakes us all up, is coffee. Like we go into ritual with coffee in the morning, wakes my spirit up. There are jingles about it in the world, but really coffee does sit on my altar. So I do, when I do brew coffee, I put a little bit of coffee aside for, for my issue. If I go out to the crossroads, I leave it out for Pumbajita as well. Like it's used in little offerings sometimes, and I get, I remember our grandparents that comes in and evokes us. But to go into a deity, Osain, I know in Lukumi and the Santeria tradition, I think Umbanda as well. I could be wrong, but forgive me, I don't want to misquote that. But Osainistas are the ones that cultivate all the herbs and are the ones who do all the rituals. And so that's where I learned my love of herbalism, came from Osain and watching the singing of a congregation of a community when we're mixing and working with the plants or cooking with the plants. There's singing involved, so it kind of runs right back to what you were saying as well. That communication of singing to the plant and the plant carrying that ancestor knowledge into the other world for you. It's such a beautiful ritual to go into. So thank you for sharing that, Deborah. It clicked as the moment you said it. So thank you.
All right. Thank you everyone for sharing all of this. I do sing to my plants too. Especially when they're blooming, I give them a little, "You are so beautiful." They love that. They love the recognition. And then I sing to the ones that aren't blooming too, because then I feel bad because I'm paying too much attention just to the ones that have flowers. Earlier, I was talking to them after we finished the last presentation and was just kind of like, you guys are loving this. Like they're just right over here, literally right to my right, all my plants in my indoor garden. And just like they can hear that they're being talked about and they just love all of the attention and they love all of the love that we're giving them. And they're super happy about it. And that makes me super happy. Anybody else have any sort of patron spirits or ancestors or spirits, deities that inform their green practice and kind of act as like a guide or inspiration along the way?
I'll be happy to share.
Yeah.
Um, Hecate was definitely that first spirit that pulled through super strong and got my attention through astral projection. And then from that point on, I thought I was kind of looking into her. I was curious about her, but I wasn't too sure if I wanted to get too close yet. And she just pulled me right in and she was like, "We're close, I promise you." And there was just so much growth that really came from doing work with her, spiritually, energetically. And she was the one who introduced me to mugwort. It's one of her sacred plants. And from there, I just kind of fell in love with the world of plants and with herbalism. And it's just a huge passion in my life to have the herbs, have that connection to earth, have that groundedness, please. And then draw down those spiritual inspirations, the creativity. Um, I just imagine in my head Yggdrasil and how the roots reach down to the deepest depths and the branches reach up to the highest of heavens. Um, and I believe working with Hecate has been very eye-opening in that way to be able to see that full kind of spectrum of life and of living and of the human experience and the spiritual experience that comes with the human experience. Um, Other than that, I do a lot of ancestral work with my dad. Um, he's like a huge ally for me on the other side. Whenever I'm making like the really hard decisions, I kind of run it by him. Um, I'll sing to the altar sometimes and connect with him. That's kind of how I give my offerings because he loved to play the guitar. And he was so good at it naturally too. He had no idea the notes or anything like that, but he just knew what sounded good. And it was like he was one with the guitar. And for me, that's singing and it's working with my voice. And it's nice to connect in that way and give back. Um, and he's just really good to work with when it comes to kind of figuring out where I could be more disciplined in my life for sure.
Kind of on the opposite end of that spectrum. And if anybody has anything to share on the previous prompt too, we can jump back and forth. We don't have to completely derail. Are there any plants, and this, I mean, we say plants, but it could be mushrooms, it could be anything. Any plants that you have felt a resistance to working with, or an actual fear or aversion to working with? Um, and that you maybe found out later that there was like some insight or reason to why you were feeling that way, or maybe haven't had a chance to work with those plants yet. But I think, there's as much that we can learn as to what attracts us to a specific plant as to the ones that kind of repel us too. So I'm just kind of curious if anyone has any experiences like that.
I actually had a really strong one with ayahuasca. Like I waited and waited and waited for my teacher's friend to come and do it. Um, and so I waited for the next time that I could. And it was supposed to be at this house in the mountains and um, like kind of a farmstead with ponds and waterfalls, and it sounded really beautiful. And then that all fell through, so we did it in an office building. Um, and I don't know, the experience of that was fine. Like it was a cute little office building, I guess, and we were eating waffles and then doing ayahuasca. Um, but during the actual ceremony, the spirit of ayahuasca came to me and was just like, "This is not yours. No, this is not a medicine for you." And so she guided me very gently, like away And we're just like, no, you sit here and just enjoy your time. I was like, okay. And I actually took 3 doses of it and never, like, nothing ever really happened. I had geometrical stuff happen. I never really, like, I had one tiny barf, like a wee tiny miniature barf. And that was kind of it. And then I don't know. I don't know if it was ayahuasca like saying that ayahuasca was I've never tried it again, so I have no idea. But the next day, the person leading it was kind of interpreting for people, like, this is what I see and what you saw. And he told everyone that transgender people and homosexuals are actually a sign of a degenerated society. Yeah, and that they're actually a sign of disease. And I was like, okay. Maybe that's why I wasn't supposed to go with you anywhere. So I don't know. I kind of felt protected by ayahuasca at the same time as being denied. So I don't know. I haven't tried it again since then, but it was a very, very strong, like, it's the first time that I've ever had such a strong, absolutely the fuck not right now. And I was like, okay, this is cool, thanks. And then just wandered off on my own. But yeah, that was my weird experience with that.
Yeah, I would share that I think one of my most profound experiences was going back to South America and participating somewhere safe and where you connect in a way with the shaman and you trust, you know, that the shaman has everyone's intentions in mind and yeah, I've actually had similar experiences and yeah, if it wasn't the right moment, it's just not the right moment. No matter what, we can show up with intention and show up prepared, not eating processed foods, whatever. If it's not for you, it's not for you. So I can relate to that. Yeah.
This is so embarrassing as an herbalist, but I really struggle with cannabis. I not to like mental health or trauma dump, but just for context, I really struggle with OCD and with like dissociation due to some PTSD stuff. And 50% of the time when I smoke weed, it is a beautiful, wonderful experience. Maybe it's like 30 or 40% of the time, but like 60% of the time, I end up just absolutely panicking, dissociating, not having a great time. And in college, I was dating a guy. He was like, "Oh, it's because you don't. It's because you have problems, and the weed's just making sure you know you have." And I'm like, "Baby, I know I have problems. I've been doing shadow work since I was a little kid. I know that I have problems. I don't need you to tell me that. I get it." So I've struggled with cannabis for so, so long. And during a really stressful period this summer, I was like, I really just want to know how to engage with this beautiful teacher of a plant because I understand her power. You know, at this point in my life, I'm an herbalist, so I believe that I know how to engage respectfully with most plants that I encounter. And I went to it was the Misty Meadows Women's Herbal Conference that I was a part of like the planning committee for and helped run and attended this summer here in New Hampshire. And Tammy Sweet, whose work I now absolutely adore, was there. And I took a workshop with her on the nervous system and working with cannabis for the nervous system. And she was like, because I had talked to her earlier in the day, she was kind of selling her tinctures at a table. I was like, Tammy, girl, I need some help. She's like, come to my workshop, we'll talk about it. And she was like, you're probably just taking way too high of a dose. Like, what? I'm like, I'm just trying to smoke weed like a normal 20 something, Tammy. And she's like, you probably can't engage with it that way. Try one dose of a high CBD, low THC tincture in a shot of water 4 times a day. I was like, what are you talking about? That's not going to do anything. And I've been taking this tincture for months now, and it's completely changed my perspective on working with cannabis. Like accepting that at least this point in my life, I cannot engage with cannabis in the way that I want to or in the way that I might be like offered at a party, but I can engage with her in this beautiful handmade organic tincture, just literally 1 or 2 drops in water. And I don't feel high, obviously, but I do feel really, really grounded in a way that I didn't realize was possible. And I know CBD has so much, like there's so much hype around CBD, it's potentially overdone. We don't know where people are getting it from. But that shift in perspective, going from a place of I'm pissed off that I can't smoke weed to this is how I engage with this plant being, has been so helpful and has helped me feel like less lame as an herbalist. Because I tell people I'm an herbalist, they're like, you smoke weed. I'm like, actually, it's complicated.
I love that you share that. Thank you so much for sharing that, Brenna, because you're right. I think a lot of people struggle with tolerance. Plants right now are being made into hybrids that are producing THC at levels that have never existed in nature, ever, ever, ever. The highest was probably 15% growing naturally in nature. And then now we're seeing 40%. That's insane. That's way too high. And then it starts becoming chasing the high instead of chasing what you were looking for, which was like balance, right? Regulating your nervous system, getting you to come back to yourself and not feel like paranoid thoughts or OCD or feeling really overwhelmed, overstimulated. I had a similar experience where I had been smoking since I was 16. I turned 25 and something shifted. Chemically, my hormones, something happened, and I couldn't smoke sativas anymore. Sativas started to wig me out. They were too heady, I felt myself being lifted out of my body, and not in a good way. It felt kind of like you're not in control. Like everything's a little foggy. And of course, your like anxiety starts to pick up because you're like, what's going on? This isn't normal. And when I noticed that that was happening, I was like, okay, like my relationship to cannabis has changed. And I would love to establish a healthier relationship to her because I really enjoy the plant. And yeah, CBD is a life-changing experience. I love it. I know everyone's like, it's so hype right now. It's like the new snake oil, but it really does work. It is extremely effective for inflammation, and a lot of different stressors in our lives. And also, it's already hardwired into our system. We have the endocannabinoid system that literally functions with these different, the receptors, and then the plant, the THC locks in kind of like a lock and key. And it's like, oh, wow. So we have potentially co-evolved with these plants over many, 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 many years. But you're right. I think for females too, yeah, you have to be gentle with this plant. She can be aggressive, very strong, very potent. However, I love the CBD ratios, where you're activating more of the relaxing, soothing benefits that the plant has to offer. Very good for digestion. We don't talk about these things enough. Usually people talk about, getting high and really exploring THC and getting lifted. But this plant has so much more to offer us than just getting high or, smoking weed. It could actually be very beneficial for hormones, for all kinds of other functions that are going on in the reproductive system and all over, which is really cool. So thank you for sharing that. That's awesome.
And I'll just put in a little plug here for cannabis in all forms for menopause. CBN in particular. And it's funny, you were talking about your journey with it. I did a lot of it excessively as a young person, really super high all the time, and then couldn't at all for the longest time. And I thought, okay, that plant's not for me anymore. I have the tiniest little amount. I feel so sick from it, whatever. And now over the past 10 years or so, as the menopause starts to hit, I find myself using it more. But I grow my own like granny weed that's like 7%. And I make my own extract of it, and I take like 1 drop, and but it's so balancing. And I do that with the CBD and then CBN at night, and it's amazing for the menopausal insomnia, for the hot flashes, for all of that. I'm not really sure how I'd make it through all this without that, but it's funny how my relationship with it has changed, and how so much of a smaller dose of it has so much of a bigger effect at this point.
And you say you grow it. So do you feel like because you grow it, you have this more intimate relationship with your plant that you're
I
growing?
do. I love growing it. We grow way more than we need just because it's such an amazing plant to grow. And I have a big garden. I always have, so I'm really good with plants. And that plant responds to what you do to it faster than any other plant. Like I will know within 20 minutes if she likes the fertilizer I just gave her. And she's so, and that's why I love growing it. And we grow tons of it. I grow trees of it and then I just give it to people because we don't need that much, you know. But it's just such a wonderful plant to engage with. And it's kind of like a gateway drug in a way that it's gotten us so into like brewing the compost tea and making our own fertilizers and our own compost and stuff that's benefited, you know, the tomatoes too. But I didn't bother to do it for them, you know, whatever. They're tomatoes. They have to deal with what they get. But yeah, and I think growing it definitely. And I would also though put in a plug for anybody that does want to work with cannabis and has trouble with it, calamus. Add that to it. That can a lot of times balance out, particularly what I think of as the really yin effects of cannabis. So if you get cold from it, which does happen, I think, for a lot of women because we tend to be kind of a colder nature energetically, the calamus can really, really help with that and balance out a lot of those different effects. And part of that is due to the pepper quality that it has. It competes with binding sites. It's the same as in black pepper. But I think there's an energetic thing too. And calamus is actually my oldest plant ally, so it's the plant I know the best anyway. But it can really balance a lot of those other effects.
Fascinating.
Yeah, cannabis is actually the one thing that I have not yet tried, like ever, ever, ever. And in my 40 plus years. And so maybe I'll have to like kind of explore more. And but I was going to talk about Amanita muscaria because that was another one that I was like, mushroom, like, I don't know about it. And part of this because I never really had like any access to it until I got some from a good friend. I noticed like decent quality and then even like then it sat on my counter for like I don't know almost like 6 months. And it was just kind of like, for whatever reason, I was just kind of scared to try it. My husband kept saying like, why don't you just like, try it, whatever. I'm like, I don't know what to do with it. And finally we both just got like each got a little cap and made tea. And it was like, oh, neither of us got high or see flying cows or whatever, unicorns farting rainbows, but it was like a very nice mellow, like, oh wow, this is nice. It's a nice feeling. And then the funny thing is that night I actually dreamt that I was like on a group trip, like camping trip and whatever, and Thomas Hattis was part of the group, people like in the group. And those of you who knows Thomas, he's like he's the psychedelic historian. He's big on working with Amanita muscaria, and he goes mushroom hunting every year because he lives in Oregon. So I was just thought it's kind of like, oh my God, like Amanita just told me to like say hi or something. I don't know. It was interesting. So I definitely need to explore that a little more.
Many years ago, found a flush of them and harvested about 20 pounds of amanitas and fermented them into this ungodly looking wine. And then distilled it and made a whole like spagyric, take it apart, put it back together thing with it. And that was wild. Don't do that at home. And that was really interesting. It was really, really wild. But one of the things we discovered about it, because my partner Paul has a theory that a lot of the Taoist long life formulas that work with a lot of different mushrooms, he has a theory that that's one of the mushrooms that should be in those, but isn't written about in them. And we made this wine and we were all, drinking and hanging out with a friend who also does alchemy. And we found that it brings your breath down to where you almost can't breathe. which was a little bit scary. And like, we're not fogging mirrors or anything at one point. And it's like, this is alarming. And so we took a bunch of cordyceps, and it kicked it right back up again so that we could breathe. And then it brought in this amazing energy that really related to a lot of what you read about in the Taoist alchemical text. And we felt like that was a really interesting thing to play with. But boy, it was weird. And we were working with the amanitas, breaking them down and cutting them and handling them and stuff. And our hands were just completely numb, like all the way up to our wrists from working with it. It was bizarre. It was a bizarre weekend.
That's amazing.
What a great story.
Yeah. I have a mushroom aversion as well, particularly psilocybin, which was the first entheogen I worked with as a teenager and kind of set me on the shamanic journey and apprenticeships that I did. But to this day, I kind of refuse to work with psilocybin. The most intensive psychedelic experiences I've had of my life have all been, well, other than bufotoxin, I would say, was with psilocybin. And I wouldn't say they're extremely unpleasant, because when you're talking about that kind of journey, there is no pleasant or unpleasant. It just is. But for me, it was a lack of trust in the intelligence that I was connecting with through the substance. And there was a feeling of, not that I think that plants are moral, or I think they're all amoral, but there were times that I would feel like I would be taken for a ride in ways that didn't actually feel in my best interest, or that I needed to have gone the way it had gone to get what I got. So I kind of felt worked a bit. And to this day, I still kind of I get given psilocybin often, and I often just kind of act as a bridge with a lot of substances that I don't ingest anymore, pass them along to the people that they need to get to. But that one in particular, I want to work with again, in that it was so instrumental for me as a young person, and I haven't been able to bring myself to do it.
I really connect with that, because I had to stop psilocybin myself as well. I used weed as a way of kind of not breaking the relationship, but shifting the relationship. I did not take any entheogens until I was probably 36. So I'm 38 now. So no, about 35. It's been a few years now. But nothing before that. And at that point in my life, I'd reconnected with somebody who was at one point the love of my life 15 years earlier, and we had a really tumultuous relationship. And go figure, I reconnect with him, and we ended up doing shrooms together the first time. I'm like, ooh. But I realized how much I needed to learn and shift in my own life. And it was ironically around the same time I started writing my book. And that really shifted my life. But eventually it got to the point where it was like even the shroom was telling me, like, no, you need to take time away from this in order to digest what you've done and what you've experienced, and the shifts that we've done together. And it's so funny. I remember I was sitting on my couch, and I had, because up in Canada, of course, like, we have dispensaries everywhere, right? So I had edibles and I had shrooms in my hand, and it was like, going into that zone, and I was having almost like a breakup conversation with the shrooms, and it was Penis Envy I was having a breakup conversation with, so it was quite an intense conversation. And I kept saying to them, like, I love you so much, but you're so cutting, you're so cutting. I kept saying over and over, and that my roommate came out and said, "What's cutting?" It's like, the shrooms are so cutting. And in my head, it was like how crystal clear the work that we had done together was, versus the weed that was so comfortable and comforting, cozy. But I haven't had any since. I mean, it's been about 2 years now. I would like to have that relationship again, but I feel the same way. It wasn't a bad breakup, but it also wasn't a healthy thing by the end, because I wasn't respecting it. Yeah.
I wonder if like these aversions that we have to certain plant medicines or like psychedelics in this case, happen because maybe this is like a theory that we've outgrown them or they've outgrown us. And that somehow we're meant to continue the journey with other plant allies in a different way, right? In my case, when I microdose, I trip. Like I could take a 0.2, a 0.5, half gram, not a lot. I will feel it. And it really shakes me up. And when I've taken like microdosing protocols, and I'm in, you know, a very like healer environment, sometimes I felt like that's a little bit too overstimulating. Like I want to be a little bit more clued in with the client, the person I'm facilitating and supporting. And if I've microdosed that day, I feel all the things. And sometimes that can be a little bit too stimulating. And when you were mentioning that penis envy are cutting, you're very right about that. It is a strong psychedelic. There are less strong you know, mushrooms that might be a little bit more fitting. However, you know your body best. And if your body's saying no, this doesn't feel right, you've maybe outgrown it for now. Maybe you could revisit in the future, but for now, at least your body's responding in a way where it might not be for you in this present moment, and that's okay too.
It was interesting because it wasn't so much like the body was having all of its sensations, and I had a really good guide whenever I was able to have trips, but it was almost like those of you who know the Bhagavad Gita, it was all like almost like that moment where Krishna unveils himself completely and utterly, and Arjuna is standing there and seeing this huge Godhead in front of him. And he says, "Can you go back to being my friend Krishna again? Because it's too much," right? That was what I was getting from shrooms. It was like you've experienced too much, you need to bring it back again and then come back to me at another point. And the amount of work. I work as a therapist. And I was in therapy at the time myself, and the amount of work and the amount of healing that I did in such an intense period of those 18 months was tremendous, like the shifts, but it was too much all at once. It was like, I experienced one moment, and I'm not saying this to be melodramatic, but I did experience ego death at one period, and it was that complete shift, and it was like, it was too much. It was interesting. It was, yeah, I'm even getting emotional talking about it now, but I know all of you probably experienced something similar. Right?
Yeah, and it can be scary too, right? Like the ego essentially is there to protect you and to keep you safe, right? And then you have a moment where that's unveiled. That can be terrifying. So I'm glad that you had guides and people that you could, turn to. I think that's so, so, so important, because that could be very scary if you don't have the right tools, if you don't know how to calm yourself during those difficult moments.
And
Yeah.
that actually brings sorry, I'll shut up.
No. That you guys are actually helping me connect some dots, that I don't have a spiritual context or lineage in which to work with psilocybin or mushrooms, where the work that I did with other traditions gave me context in which to work with wachuma, to work with ayahuasca, to work with many of the plants that I was introduced to. I could go to those ancestral practices and ceremonialize them in my own context and hold ceremony for myself or for my loved ones, where with mushrooms, I was never introduced into a cultural context in which to work with them. And I think as a psychonaut teenager, they were for tripping out. And so I think part of me kind of goes back into that state, even working with them in small doses. This is recreational, and I can't approach plants in that way recreationally or casually because of the sensitivity that I've developed at this point. So it does send me into overwhelming experiences, and I won't talk anymore, but I can relate to from my 5-MeO experience. There's my life before those 7 minutes, and there's my life after that 7 minutes. And it took me a good 2 to 3 years to integrate that 7 minute experience. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I also get emotional as soon as I start talking about it too.
Well, it's funny because I was going to ask the group a similar question, right? Because, you know, I had come from an experience where I was so heavily involved with Lukumi and Spiritismo, working with my godfather, and then I moved onto my own, and that's when these experiences were happening. And I noticed within that period, you know, I was doing this work with these shrooms, but my own spirit guides were kind of there, but not really wanting to interact. And I heavily relied then on working with my own spirit guides after that. So I'm curious for the group, maybe open up the conversation here. How do your various spirit allies play together or not play together? I'm wondering with this.
Oh, Ben, me. Hi. It's thank you everybody for sharing. It literally was hitting me in the back of my brain and it popped up. I have an aversion to mushrooms and psilocybin. A little bit of cannabis, but I think that's with age and hormones. But one of the reasons is because I am an espiritista and a psychopomp, and I talk to the girl. I talk to the dead. What are you gonna say? I talk to the dead. So I have to be very gentle when lifting that veil because it cuts through the barrier or the boundaries that I have for myself to connect with spirit and essentially, become the medium, take on that energy. So I was always very afraid. Interestingly enough, the one gentle kind of entryway into having a little bit of a psychedelic experience was tobacco in the form of pape. Pape actually was really gentle, where the experience was it was it's a little interesting because you got to inhale it like cocaine. But it was really gentle, and spirit was very happy with that kind of entrance because I was working with an ancestor plant that comes from my heritage. And I know, Isaiah, you've been talking a lot about tobacco, and that kind of my association with tobacco. Grandfather tobacco is very gentle to me personally, and in form of hape, which becomes a little bit more psychedelic. Some really interesting things have happened.
I just wanted to jump in because I found it really interesting when you were talking about psilocybin and how you speak to the dead. And I feel like psilocybin was what kind of prepped me for what was to come. Because I also kind of was experimenting with it in my teens. There wasn't any real like purpose behind it. It was just kind of like, try this thing out, like you'll connect. And I'm like, sure, let's see what connecting even is. Um, and I just never had a good experience on it. It was always that very cutting feeling that Ben was talking about, where it is just really cutting you into shape and making sure you're seeing all the things that need to be seen. But it does, I think that visual of Shiva was just super powerful. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. It's just so much and all at once. And I am a really sensitive person, and I like to make sure that I'm digesting everything, and that's going to take time, and it's going to take, warming up the gut, and that's just a lot to digest all at once. Um, but yeah, it was still really monumental, and the things that I learned from the experience were things that took years of developing, and I was really uncomfortable with being able to connect with the dead for a long time. Even now, I still have like my reservations because it is a very sensitive thing, and you have to be well protected and very aware of your own boundaries and your own limitations. Um, but that was psilocybin kind of prepped me for that. Because I was doing that shortly before my dad passed, and then after he passed, it was like, well, now you have a reason to put this into practice. Now you can't just keep running away from it. And I didn't really work with psilocybin after that. It was just in that moment. I tried maybe microdosing once or twice afterward, and it didn't really do anything to me. I didn't feel anything. I didn't have the trips. It wasn't necessarily calming. So it was just kind of that passageway into connecting with the ancestors and being able to be more comfortable with certain spiritual gifts. I feel like these plants that we have aversions to just kind of teach us what right relationship looks like. Um, and what that means to us because we all have our different boundaries and our different limitations, and right relationship is only going to be, you know, right when it's symbiotic, when there's that synchronicity. So definitely feel like these plant aversions are those secret teachers of what it feels like to be in these beautiful symbiotic relationships.
I'll just jump in the idea of the right relationships with the plants. I really like that idea. And it brings to mind not so much a plant I guess I have an aversion or difficulty with, but just the idea of trying experiences, challenging experiences that then you can look at and frame one way or another. And all of the plants that I work with them first by eating them raw every day for like 2 weeks before I do anything with it. So I have to have a relationship with all the plants. I can't really afford to have aversions to them because we have to process them and make them and sell them to people. So many years ago when the big Salvia divinorum craze, everybody was doing that all the time, and we were working with that, and everybody was having these horrific experiences with it. And every experience I had with that plant was beautiful, so beautiful. I love that plant. Um, but it was interesting because a lot of it, like you said, right relationship, and even the one really trying experience I had with that plant, it's so funny looking back on it because I was growing one and having a lot of difficulty. They're very difficult to grow. And so I took some of our extract of it one night and went to bed, and I said, I need you to help me help your plant because she's dying. I don't know what to do for her. And I had probably the worst nightmare I've ever had. So if I just leave the story there, everybody's like, well, you had a horrible salvia experience. Well, no, I had a nightmare that I was being buried alive and I was suffocating, and it was horrific. And as soon as I woke up, I was like, oh, those roots are really impacted and she needs looser soil. And that was it. And it was a nightmare. It was a horrific experience in the moment of it. But as soon as I woke up, I was like, okay, I asked her to tell me what was going on. She told me, I fixed her roots. She grew great. But then, talking about right relationship, we were doing a lot of festivals at that point. And at one of our festivals, we had little tester bottles of things. All of our salvia bottles went missing. And people regularly stole from us. It's just life. Well, 2 weeks later, I get them back in the mail with a note that says, I am so sorry I stole these. Clearly, I made a horrible mistake taking these from you. Please ask her to forgive me. And I was like, whoa, what did she do? Like, how did that go for you? So it's about right relationship, and it's about framing it. And I kind of feel bad for that person, but kind of not, I mean, they asked for it, but I mean, to this day, I wonder, like, how, yikes, what happened there?
Micah, that reminds me of stories of people in Hawaii who receive lava rocks back in the mail because they decided to take them home, and they're like, with blessings, please tell her, please, 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 please. Like, we get the lessons we ask for when we steal shit or take things that that don't belong with us.
And I got the lesson I asked for with the roots too, and I mean, it was a nightmare. It was horrifying. But as soon as I woke up, I was like, okay, she just told me something, and the nightmare was over, and it was a beautiful experience. And all of the other experiences I ever had with that plant were beautiful. But there's this character that she sometimes manifests as, that's a gardener, and I'm a gardener. And sometimes you weed, and sometimes you prune, and sometimes you fertilize and pamper, and that's how she treats you. And she will kind of trim things that don't belong to you, take away things that maybe don't serve you. But none of those experiences were anything like what people were telling me they were having, that were horrifying and a nightmare, and I'll never do that plant again. And I think a lot of it too is smoking it, and smoking these 80x extracts that you buy at the gas station. It's like, well, that's going to end badly. That's a bad idea.
That's kind of how I feel about Datura. like when I do markets and sell my Datura products, I always get people who give me the look like, oh my God, Datura, like it's so dangerous. I got like horrible trips, blah blah blah. And then they like say that they're afraid of Datura, and I'm kind of like, why? Like, what were you doing with it? And then come to find out they were like eating, I don't know, a handful of seeds just trying to get high. Basically, I like my conclusion for all of the stories that people told me was kind of like basically like they're not giving the respect that she demands. Because for me, Datura was always loving. Like she has this really gentle, I mean, she would be like, hey, I'm fancy as F, but not afraid to cut a bitch. Like, excuse my language, but that's basically what she is that she can be very gentle, but she's not afraid to like, hey, you're not giving me the respect and I'm gonna like put you in your place. And that's what I usually tell people, like, well, maybe you shouldn't be doing the stuff that, you know, just to F around, because you will find out, just like Githira was saying, it's like, yeah, FAFO.
So I really enjoyed hearing you guys talking about like your experiences, and it just I was waiting because I was just like, I feel that mine comes from such a different place, because the plant that I have had a weird relationship with is cacao. You know, like I how can I say this? Let me find my words. The psychedelic experience, yeah, you know, to each their own, no problem. The poisonous plants, yeah, we good. The warrior spirits, like the plants that come in a high toxicity and all that, yeah. The plants that open our heart for human connection, not so much. I'm, you know, like um, cacao for me was such a journey that I didn't even like chocolate. It got to that point. Industrialized chocolate, the smell of it, you know, like too loving, too sweet. And it was very interesting because it wasn't it wasn't something that I realized until somebody else pointed out to me, because then I started developing a version for lemon balm as well. And I insisted in not trying mallow, even though I think it's mallow. I don't know how to pronounce in English. We say malva in Portuguese. And my mom was like, well, you could really use, you know, a little mallow syrup. It would do you good, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, even like the smell of the flowers, it started giving me the same reaction. And then I was talking to my mom about it. And she was like, did you realize that what you don't like is the vulnerability of human connection? And I'm like, I don't think so. I'm vulnerable with you. What are you talking about? Like, and she was like, well, let's take a step back. Let's, you know, talk about your human relationships and all these things. And I was just like, that's not true. And then she brought like ex-partners to the conversation. She was like, you really liked that person, didn't you? And I was just like, yeah, I did. And they're like, but when you guys broke up, you kind of just said, well, whatever, and you moved on. And I'm like, yeah, I did. And she was like, the same thing you did with your friendships. Like, because you're not vulnerable, you don't make the connection. You're kind of, it is the same thing in the plant. So it kind of went, you know, around the topic for a couple of years, actually, between my mom and I, and between my partner and I as well, that I do love him, but vulnerability, it's a whole different conversation. You know, like I love him to pieces, and I love some of my friends. I'm a very loyal friend, but again, I'm a very loyal friend, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to ask for your help. You know, so for me, I like to make this joke about the Venusian plants and I, right? But it's not the Venusian plants that is like belladonna, that you're gonna be the mistress or whatever. That's cool. It's like the cacao and the lemon balm and those plants. So I feel that now coconut helped me in my relationship with cacao. And I came, in my relationship with coconut because of working with Yemanjat that I had to do for a client. I am a person ritualized for Yemanja. I also have had a very challenging relationship with her throughout my life. Both of my mothers were ritualized for Yemanja as well. But I had this client and I really want to help. And the only way that I could see to get the job done was this working with Yemanja that involved working with coconut. And I was just like, okay. And I went to Yemanja kind of like, oh, remember me? I'm kind of like apologizing and then asking you to do me a solid here at the same time with this working that I have to do for a third party that has nothing to do with my own personal issues. And then on that night, I had a dream of me eating coconut. And for whatever reason, I thought it was a good idea to mix cacao with coconut and lemon balm. And it's very delicious, by the way, if you ever want to try coconut milk with some cacao and then you put the lemon balm on there and then you strain the whole thing. And that was it. And it was very wild because I was trying to help this person who was having some relationship vulnerability issues. And I was really insisting not deal with mine. And the only way to help them was to go and access those energies that I didn't want to be in a relationship with myself. So mine was more like a sense, a Venusian, loving aversion. It wasn't so much about the flight or those other things. So that was my plant aversion. It was cacao and lemon balm.
Thank you for sharing. We could probably just keep talking for the rest of the night, but it is almost midnight. So if anyone is ready for Betty Bye, don't feel like you're being held hostage.
Oh,
I'm
and
gonna
don't
jump
forget,
off. But thank you so much, Amy and Kobe. This has been so cool. So
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah.
thank you for being here. And I was gonna say, don't forget, we are doing time change tonight,
Yes.
especially for those who are not in US. So sorry.
Yeah, thank you so much for the conversation, you guys. I'm on the East Coast, so I'm gonna go to bed. This was a blast. So nice to meet you all. And also, I just want to come visit you all. I want to do a little road trip and say hi to everybody. And if y'all teachers are in New Hampshire at any point, let me know. Anywhere in New England, I'll come see you. We'll say hi. I'll bring tea. Bye, guys.
If anybody's
night.
ever in Northern California, please get in touch.
Yes.
Love to invite you to our gardens and our orchard and hang out.
Pleasure, everybody.
Love
Nice
it.
to meet all of you.
I'm just
Thanks.
a
To
little
meet you
ways from
all.
you up in Oregon, so
Oh, you're not far from us. What part of Oregon, Micah?
I'm on the southern coast, about an hour north of the California border. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Not
Yeah,
far.
yeah, it's beautiful. I love it here. I love it.
Thank you again, Kobe.
Thank
you
you
so much.
both for joining.
Thank you, everyone. It was so nice to talk to you all and meet everyone and hear your experiences and share mine. I really appreciate the little community that we've built with the Botanica Obscura. Thank you so much to Kobe and Emmy for holding the ritual space for everyone to get together. Super appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Kobe.
Yeah, I mean, thank the plants. They're the bossy ones that force me into this every year. So
Oh, Belladonna is it's being a diva.
yeah, she's the little dominatrix over here.
There's kind of a point where they tell you don't have a choice anymore. They're like, you can do this or you can not, but it'd be better for you if you did it.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, good night, everybody. Thank you so
Good
much for
night.
being
I'm gonna
Good
here.
sign off
night.
now.
Thanks.
Good night, y'all. Thanks for coming.
Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Kobe. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Night.